Good evening, everybody. While people are finishing getting their little treats before we sit down, I thought I would just welcome you all to the Norman Williams Library for this installment of our Journeying series. Some of you might know about the Journeying series. We've only had a couple programs in it so far, but we have another one next week happening as well. People who have gone on journeys and then want to talk about it, inspire other people for their journeys. And Laura and Clara came to me talking about how they had walked the Camino, 500 miles, and they wanted to talk about it. And I said, yeah, this is good. And I want to thank Diana Kay here with WCTV8 for filming tonight's presentation. And so if there's things that you miss and you need to go back and see it, it will end up being on their website as well as showing on the local TV station. WCTV8 and WCTV8.com is where it will be online. And the library can't function and do these things without support from the community. We appreciate your support. And so I guess without further ado, Laura Foley and Clara Jimenez are here to talk about the Camino.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Danelle. Thank you to the Norman Williams Public Library for hosting this event, and particularly to Danelle, who has helped us put this together. And thank you to all of you for being here. Wow, there is a lot of interest in El Camino. One of the last obligations of a pilgrim when they return home is actually to share the experience with others. So thank you for letting us meet this important obligation. I am Clara Jimenez.
I'm Laura Foley.
And we have a lot to share about our experience, but we also want to leave plenty of room for questions and answers, particularly if you are interested in doing El Camino yourself and you have some practical questions. We'll be happy to answer them afterwards. So what we're going to do is that we are first going to make a presentation. I will talk for a while and Laura will read poems, and we'll alternate for a little bit. And after our talk, we'll give you a video presentation that we have prepared with photographs that we both took during El Camino. And then we'll have questions and answers, and hopefully you will stay for more tapas. So to start, what is El Camino? El Camino is a pilgrimage route that has its origins in the 9th century. In the year 812, there were news, so it was reported that the remains of St. James, one of Jesus' apostles, had appeared in a remote northwestern part of Spain. And St. James, according to tradition, had actually, after the death of Christ, had traveled all the way to that region to spread the gospel with very little success because it was a strongly pagan region, and then returned to Jerusalem where it was beheaded. So according to, again, legend or religious tradition, the remains of St. James were miraculously sent back to Spain, buried and forgotten for 7 centuries. When in the 812, the king of that corner of Spain receives news of finding this miracle, he orders the construction of a shrine. And this is very important because at that time, he was the king of Asturias and Galicia, which is this region over here. That was the only Christian region left in Spain. Everything else was under Muslim ruling. So he orders the construction of this shrine, and immediately pilgrims start arriving. And by the 12th century, it becomes one of the 3 fundamental pilgrimage sites in all Christendom. The other 2 are Rome and Jerusalem. And the arrival of people from all corners of Europe is staggering. There are some authors that calculate that the number of pilgrims that arrive every year between the centuries 11th and 13th century and 13th century is about 500,000 people per year. Well, think about it, because now it's a lot of people, but in medieval ages, this is basically a great chunk of the population. So because of that, the route becomes a very important route for exchange of culture, artistic tendencies, technological ideas about building churches, cathedrals, as well as commerce. The Camino is not a single route. I'm going to move a bit the microphone. As you can see in this map, as you can see in this map, all these dotted lines that you see from everywhere are ways that are currently waymarked and that you can follow, following the yellow arrows that you will see in the slideshow, and they will eventually take you to Santiago. And most start in Spain, but as you see, some come from Europe, and there are some that come in from Germany, and as far as Budapest, you can follow yellow arrows and end up in the cathedral. But if you see in this slide, which is the French way, almost all the routes that came from Europe converged in a single point, which is here. There is only an extra one. This is Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. And it's a very small town, but it was crucial because right there is a gap and a col in the Pyrenees, which are enormous mountains. So it was one of the few places where pilgrims could congregate to pass in safety. And the issue of safety was both that the nature of the terrain is quite dangerous. Also, there were a lot of bandits waiting for them because they knew that they were going to pass just by this narrow gap. And also some of the territories, particularly in the 11th century, some of the territories were not friendly, so they had to congregate and pass, trusting the safety of numbers, and sometimes also under the protection of the Knight Templars, which were monk warriors that protected pilgrims. After the Pyrenees, the route that we're going to talk today, which is the route that we followed, crosses Spain to the northwest, going through the regions of Navarra, La Rioja, Castilla-León, and Galicia. This route now, just as it was then, is the most heavily used. People of all creeds, nationalities, and ages walk this path. People complain that the way to St. James is currently in modern times crowded. Actually, last year it was under 300,000 people from all over, all the ways, completed El Camino, some doing very short routes, but definitely not as crowded as in medieval times. People rely in an extensive network of albergues. You can walk this route and you can rely on an extensive network of albergues, which are pilgrim refuges, where you can stay if you carry a credencial, which is a pilgrim's passport. And essentially what you do is that you go along the way putting stamps to demonstrate that you are walking the distance. And you also get it stamped in each albergue as you stay. This is also very important, not just to stay in albergues, because at the end of the pilgrimage, you receive La Compostela. And La Compostela is in Latin, so it's not that they have misspelled our names. But what the Compostela means is it accredits that you have completed the pilgrimage. You only need to complete the 100 kilometers. So if some of you do El Camino and get intrigued of why at the end it gets so incredibly crowded, is because that's the minimum amount you need in order to obtain this, this certificate. They also issue, thank you. They also issue, in order to get this Compostela, you need to prove, or you need to declare that you have done the pilgrimage for religious purposes, for spiritual purposes, or what the Catholic Church calls in its wisdom, simply a spirit of search, which accommodates a large number of people. If you have no spirit of search whatsoever, they can also give you This is a serious bragging rights document. It is a certificate of completion that certifies the distance you have walked. And they will look at your passport and at the most distant point, and they will calculate. And they're very stingy. They gave us 799 kilometers instead of the 800. Why did we do the Camino? Well, I'm originally from Spain. I have been fascinated by El Camino for a very, very long time, both because there is a really appealing challenge in crossing my country on foot, but also by a pull that I really cannot explain. I am not Catholic, I am not a particularly religious person, but I have felt this inclination to do this particular path for a long time. And when I have shared this with other pilgrims doing the route, many indicate following a similar call. So somehow, after this, I pulled my wife Laura into my own madness, and she ended up being as committed to this project as I was. So it was only a matter of finding the right opportunity. And before we left, the only thing we did is that we trained a little. It's not like a marathon where you need to follow a very specific set of mileage and speed in order to complete it, but we did put some miles and we tested our gear, and we followed the expert's recommendation to carry no more than 10% of our body weight in the backpack, which require a lot of weighing and packing and repacking. And the backpack is right there so that you get an idea of how few things we carry.
I'm going to read a couple of poems now about our training. Packing light. Slung across my shoulders, I will walk with it across Vermont, then the Pyrenees, along a rutted ancient Roman road. Not too heavy, I will carry its silent weight through noisy Pamplona, Burgos, Leon, across the flat Meseta, whose dry heat cooks my feet in sturdy shoes, through soothing wooded mountains, valleys of Galicia. My not young knees will carry us through Spanish wilderness and time. Isabella's shadow, Charlemagne's too, Teresa of Avila's, St. James's, of course, to Compostela, meadow of the stars, step by step from east to west, beneath the glittering Milky Way, through history and back to possible futures, my purple backpack and me. So part of my training involved being at the Aquatic Center in White River Junction. Pilgrim in training. In the swimming pool, I dodge toddler clutching moms floating toward me around the circular kiddie river. They don't see, as I water walk against the current, every sturdy press of knee and foot, knee and foot, knee and foot, each push against unseen waves. This granny's climbing the Pyrenees. So we first flew to Madrid, which is where Clara's family still lives, her mother and her siblings. And we stayed with her mother. This poem is about setting out, leaving the mother, called Madre. And so I'll just explain that we flew to Madrid, we spent a couple of days there, then we took a train to up to Pamplona, from where we took we hired a taxi, shared it with somebody else, and took that all the way into France in order to start the journey. So we started it in France. So this is, when I talk about a train here, this is the train from Madrid to Pamplona. Madre. As the train rumbles side to side, as we leave the town of Clara's birth, We move into the hot, dry plain, green after recent, well-loved, sweet spring rains. I think of last night, how we sat in her mother's flat, abode of 50 years, as thunder sang its omen tones, as clouds dark gray against the still blue sky let go its load on us, on the city, on all of Spain. A heavy rain, and how today the sky's all sun, bright blue after last night's sweeping. And how this morning we crossed the not yet busy street, as her mother leaned over the balcony, her small frame bent with age, her spine un perro rabioso que muerde, a rabid dog she can't bite back. How we and she called and waved as we turned the sunny corner, our backpacks the last she sees of us, as she turns away, closing the casement window to sit alone and think of us.
Once we were on the path, what did we learn in our trip? Well, El Camino is really a canvas for your own personal experience, and is one that accommodates many ways of expressing one's faith, or sense of a spirit, or fellowship with others. Something we really didn't understand about El Camino until we actually walked it is that the Camino to Santiago is very different from other pilgrimage routes. Unlike Mecca or Bethlehem or Lourdes, where the point is to make it to the religious shrine, and it doesn't matter what method of transportation you have chosen, in El Camino, the pilgrimage is the walk itself. Walking is the act that most people actually are interested in and celebrating rather than the arrival. And there is a great sense of reverence for the path itself. People talk about El Camino with this reverence that I think is either people are feeling the energy of the millions of people who have gone exactly in the same steps, or maybe it's just the sense of community, but people talk about El Camino as an entity. They say Camino provides. This is Camino, the Camino provides. And this is an assurance that wherever you need, it will appear as you walk. And a cynical mind reminded us that Camino can also provide you with an early death, which is probably true. But people talk about El Camino as a safe space where if you deposit the trust in the path will carry you on to Santiago. And the fact is that it's true. As we walked, Camino angels appeared and provided us with food and water and even free hugs. Locals were really eager to give us directions if they saw somebody lost, and assisted distressed pilgrims. And to my surprise, this is something that really struck me, even the graffiti in the Camino is overwhelmingly positive, and people leave words of wisdom, of encouragement that you find as you walk. And this sense of reverence stands to the figure of the pilgrim. There is obviously, this is it's not Disneyland, there is the unavoidable commercialization. You know, people know that a large number of foreigners and tourists are going to pass along, so there is some exploitation of the theme. But the reality is that we felt treated in many places as if we had a special status. Many towns honor pilgrims in statues and works of street art. Locals wish you buen camino, and many asked us to pray for them when we reached Santiago, which is something that we found especially moving.
This poem is probably from my lowest point, when I really was suffering with a bum knee. I think it's self-explanatory. In Estella, the pain in my knee begs me to stop for the day, wants me to fly home in defeat. I crumple into a bus stop seat, bus once a day. But just then, round the bend, it materializes. Driver asking me to pray for him when I arrive in Santiago de Compostela. Then consoles this limping, weeping, non-Spanish speaking pilgrim. Takes his bus off its route, straight to an albergue heaven, where I sleep for 2 days. And the knee quiets, allows me to go 400 miles more, to do as I promised the angel from Estella. Our name. We were given the name. As we sat defeated, weeping on a bus, having given up for the day, we knew what we were called. Or in a coffee shop, faces bright and eager before dawn, backpacks slung by our sides, or collapsed, resting in the shade, leaning over a bridge, staring down, limping to vespers on aching knees, crossing a wet poppy field toward others of our tribe having lost the way, or getting sick roadside, or striding through small towns, locals running out, saluting us, calling us by our one God-given name, Pilgrim, requesting that we bless them.
One of the beauties of the Camino is that the simplicity of the purpose and the simplicity of the routine leaves your mind really open to think, to observe your thoughts and feelings, and to reflect. Essentially, your routine is you walk, you eat, you walk, you do laundry, you sleep. You have very, very few possessions. If you load more than you truly need, you will pay for it. And it is amazing how little you really need for what ended up being a 34, 35-day trip. It is really, everything had to fit in that backpack. And it's amazing how wonderful it is and how easy it is to get dressed in the morning when the choice is that there is no choice. It's your clean shirt while the other shirt dries up. It's no exaggeration. And I think Laura has a couple of poems about that.
Rinse and repeat. In the birthplace of a saint, we rest on a bench, ponchos protecting us from rain. Another town of narrow stone streets spilling red, pink, and white geraniums, cats transacting mysterious feline business. We hobble to a restaurant, remove shoes, rub our feet, to ease 20 miles hiked, eat a pilgrim meal inspired by peasants. No need for much talk. Momentarily, we'll sleep to sounds of children playing in the street. Before dawn, we're ready to do it all over again. This one is set in the town of Santo Domingo, where we happened to stay in a hotel, and the window looked right out onto the main plaza. Bell Journal. A wedding at 2, rose petals strewn on cobblestones, a funeral in the evening, solemn family in their finest, festive crowds at night, who dance and sing and drink wine as a church bell tolls the quarter hour, each half and each whole. Time noted temporally and constantly as we, weary pilgrims, windows open to the plaza, breathe in Santo Domingo's life all through the night.
The advantage of walking this way, as I was saying, is that there is plenty of time to walk with your thoughts and whatever your memories bring. This, again, is a very individual experience. Nobody can tell you what you are going to feel or prepare you for how this will be for you. Many guides and many authors point, for example, at La Meseta, which is this region over here, basically the middle of Spain. And they point at that as the toughest leg of the pilgrimage. is about 10 days of very flat, very hot, and very lonely land. And to some, according to these guides, this landscape without this landscape and the lack of distractions and the monotony may bring episodes of great mental suffering. Some guides actually describe it as a metaphoric death that will be followed by the resurrection when you reach the Green Mountains of the Northwest. And frankly, I was a bit apprehensive. I really didn't know what kind of demons were going to chase me under the Meseta hot sun. And well, what happened in reality is that we happened to cross that region in the rainiest spring in a decade. So what we encountered was that it was massively covered by wildflowers. I have crossed the Meseta many times in my childhood. I had never seen it this way. So what I really experienced, it was gratefulness. And gratefulness at its deepest, just like the mud, by the way. But it was, I was grateful for the flowers and grateful for the clouds, and I couldn't understand why people were complaining about the rain, probably because they don't know what the Meseta can look like in a really bad, hot day. But I was truly grateful for this unlikely opportunity to see the Meseta in complete bloom.
In every town, walking the endless Meseta, I turned to see yellow broom flowers, ripening wheat, poppies going by, the only way to know. Each night an ancient town new to me, steps closer to our journey's end. I feel no mystic pull towards Santiago, but I believe in the awe of those who do. As Gregorian chants pipe through a darkened church, and a friend we meet weeps freely at a cafe table. That night, I dream my baby falls through a crack between elevator and shaft, and too afraid to look alone, I call for Clara to help me search the chasm. We leave Castro Jerez in the graying dark before dawn, before cafes open, our shoes tapping a slow rhythm on quiet streets. At the top, far from any town or road, a man with a small van greets us, smiling in the rain, offering free rolls. The path takes us somewhere many have gone before. I feel them all in the hard-packed trail in my aching feet. This is a slightly different take on the same area. Mud. After the steep climb and the Camino angel at top proffering coffee, hot milk rolls, after the long trudge across the high mesa in the cloudy, wet dawn, there was the steep descent. The path slippery with stones, left knee starting to ache. And then, when you thought it would be easy because flat, because just a long ribbon of road continuing on beyond the limits of sight, you found not ease, but deep squelch, boot sucking and red, each step into wet glue weighing you down, as you simply carried on, as it started once again to rain.
You see the theme developing, and you will also see it in the video. The Camino is also, leaving the solitude of Meseta aside, is also an opportunity to connect with others. I often describe this trip as living for a month or for over a month in a moving village or a river. You know, we all move. There are some people who are very fast, some people who are very slow, but the average is that we all move more or less at the same pace. And in order for this to happen, you don't really need to get attached to any particular group. You can walk on your own and naturally fall on your pace. And it is perfectly okay to stop when you need, and people will continue walking. But chances are that at the end of the day, you will end up in the same town than most of the people who started with you that day. And the result of this is that, well, you get to a place where you have never set, or at least that was my experience. I had never set foot in my life, and there are plenty of people there to greet me. There were people, you know, you could have a beer with, or, you know, they will ask you if they had seen you limping, what happened, why did you stop, and so on. So it felt like there was a village in any place where we stopped. And if you choose to also join other peoples in their spiritual practices, definitely many of the towns offer a pilgrim's mass, which many people choose to attend, or stop by the local convent and say hi to the nuns, as we did. As any intentional community, this is really a very good place to develop tolerance. We all snore. We are all stinky. We can all be very noisy. People have very different backgrounds and ideas, and they are all walking this path, and definitely they have either a religious experience or a political idea that is very different of yours. We met very delightful and like-minded people, but one of my favorite or most memorable experiences was one day when I had to walk for 20 miles in the company of an American man, a very devout Catholic, who thought that both Francisco Franco, the fascist dictator who ruled Spain for 40 years, and President Trump were great. And I had to walk. I was set for the day. There was nobody else around. No, I exaggerate. There was a very gentle Canadian woman who was just a neutral voice. But it seemed that he and I could not agree on a single thing. And yet there we were. Walking, following a common path, and having a very spirited discussion, neither he or I back down, and sharing bread. And for sure it made the walk that day, which was quite long, much faster and much more entertaining. And we parted as friends, and in fact, we still correspond. The other aspect that is pretty unique of El Camino is just as a traveling experience, right? There is something amazing in visiting a country at walking pace. You understand the context of the history of a country and the art. You walk on Roman roads, you cross Romanesque bridges, somebody points to an Arab wall, you point to famous medieval battle sites, jostling bridges. How many of us have ever crossed a jostling bridge? And of course, you arrive to magnificent, absolutely magnificent cathedral.
This poem is called Rabé de las Calzadas, and it was a short day that we only walked 8 miles that day. We arrived early enough to just hang out in the town, and which is what I need to write. You know, I need to kind of be quiet. So I wrote this poem, and what's sort of sweet about it is that the next morning we were staying in a small pensione, which was basically rooms over a bar, which served delicious food. All the meals were actually very good, and really nice innkeeper. And so we became very friendly with him. And the next morning I gave him this poem that I had written, which is about the town, and Clara translated it for him, and he was just so tickled about it. And it was written in pen and scrap paper, and so he went and put it up on this board where he had right next to the Virgin Mary. So I just feel like that's my favorite publishing experience. Maybe it's still there. Rabé de las Calzadas. The buildings are limestone, rosy, ochre, ancient blocks. The church is stone, on top an iron cross. In a rooftop nest of wheat and twigs she's gathered from the field, a stork, on skinny legs, stretches her wings and feeds her young. A church bell chimes the hour and the quarter hour and the half as seeds float down from unseen trees, linden, oak, acacia, birch. A small black dog trots by, at home in this ancient town, as are the storks, the seeds, the iron lamps, the oval drinking trough, the wind holes cut in stone. And this one is called Back to Sand at the monastery of San Felix de Oca. And the monastery is really just a ruin of stones. And we were able to just kind of be there for a little bit. Swallows dart through open window holes in a hurry to make their summer nests. Eager grass sprouts among broken rocks, fallen bits of mortar turning slowly back to sand. A tomb remains, a name inscribed in stone, honoring love lost 1,000 years ago. We mouth the words, marvel at 3 tenacious snails clinging to wet grass spears, just beginning to shake in rising wind, black clouds mobbing to drench us yet again. We pull our jackets close around our chests and journey on.
The other special thing of doing travel by foot is that instead of jumping from point to point to hit all these mass seasides, you actually see these changes in landscape in slow motion. The small villages start getting larger and larger as you approach a urban center. Then you see the unavoidable industrial suburbs, then the city downtown, and then you go back and you fade again into rural life. And you will really understand the Spanish landscape as you cross these very high mountains of the Pyrenees, and then you blend into the valley. You see the Rioja vineyards appear, you cross vineyards, and then the vineyards disappear, and then you move into this arid center, and by the last days of Meseta, you see the mountains really far in the distance, then they get closer and closer, and then up again you go, and you get into the green and cool mountains of León and Galicia.
The roses of Logroño. Among the roses of Logroño, aging, aching limbs, weariness, sense of homelessness, even news of a good friend's death fade into nothingness beneath the climbing blossoms made brighter as the sun from clouds appears, amid church bells' constant tolling beneath the fragrant roses of Logroño. A table on the grass, Nájera. Thanks be for this place of rest midway through our trek, this table placed on grass, cafe with river view, parade passing, drums and lively song above the muddy rain-fed waters. Thanks be for a week of climbing Pyrenees, striding safely through lightning storms, in open fields, surviving constant drenching, bone weariness, a day of violent illness. Thanks be for the will to shoulder backpacks once again to rejoin the holy pilgrim stream. May we follow to the end, grateful to our bodies and minds for letting spirit through.
Finally, as a physical challenge, well, it was 500 miles. Only 10% of the pilgrims who set from St. John with the intention of reaching the cathedral in one go actually reached their destination. There is no way to escape the reality of being attached to a body. Both of us experienced pain. We both caught the nasty stomach bug that affected many of our fellow pilgrims. And we made demands from our bodies and had to decide when to push it and when to heed the body's message. We learned to eat when we were hungry, and sometimes this meant second and even third breakfast, which is fun, but is not an indulgence. You really need to fuel and rest.
Second breakfast. Tortilla de patatas, warm from the pan, soft but not runny, local potatoes and eggs, fresh bread on the side. We hold a slice in one hand, in cafe in the other, leche, divinely foamed, so delicious each morning. after trudging long miles, climbing steep mesas, sliding down through the rain. Imagine, today, someone rose even earlier than we. A woman in long skirts, bending to collect juicy, fat snails. Apron full of someone's lunch. A feast we'll imagine hours later as we munch granola bars like packed sawdust, somewhere further along our dusty path. In Herrerias, this late spring afternoon among the mountains of León, I sit and watch the light moving on a shadowed field, rounded bales of still green hay, poplar leaves shuddering in the breeze, cooling my face, the usual shadows lengthening toward night. But in the woods, unseen, a bird I've never heard before, a call arising from ancient tales, a strangely plangent medieval song, but so clear, right here, cuckoo. I rub my ears and hear again, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. And then, summer is a comin' in, rising through time woods in my mind from elementary school, my singing cuckoo, cuckoo, loudly sing cuckoo, in Concord with these Spanish woods. In León, after 3 weeks of rain, these clean children parading cobbled streets to school, these pigeons hoping for a crumb ready for the day as we, these pilgrims passing on the trail in slant morning light, saluting us in fellowship. These moments I would slow if I could, absorbing more deeply the sun's healing.
Despite all the physical challenges, we really were amazed at the power of the body that keeps getting stronger as terrain and weather challenged us. Definitely some of those mountains are not a joke, and some days, as you have heard many times, we walked for hours on end in the rain. And some days under unbearable heat. And one of my favorite memory of extreme effort was actually the day before we arrived in Santiago. We had planned on walking about 15 miles that day and leave the remaining 15 miles for the next day. But when we got to our projected stop place, we were just too excited. So we decided to keep walking. We just wanted to get a bit closer, and actually I didn't decide, Laura decided, and I just had to trudge along. But this meant that we continue walking after our projected time, unbearable heat, and a 90-degree day, very humid, and most people had already stopped to rest, so we had to hoof it up the hill all on our own. But that was a gift because it allowed us to finish the following day with a very cool, beautiful walk down to Santiago in time to join the rest of the pilgrims for the big celebration of the Pilgrim's Mass in the cathedral.
So in the slideshow, there's a tiny little video piece of us when we're really hot and we're climbing the steep hill and we've just made it into Santiago and we start dancing. In Santiago Cathedral, unbelieving, I pray as requested for the nuns of Rabé who took us in, then for 3 good friends recently deceased. Then my granddaughters, my partner too, because who knows, maybe this will work. Then my children, their spouses, as I kneel in darkness before the glittering image of St. James, the vast flickering candlelight visible in my innermost nave. So in some ways the hardest part for us, and we may talk about this in the questions and answers, but really was ending. And it was so hard and everything was difficult, and all we wanted when it was done was to do it again. After the pilgrimage, we will miss waking in darkness to walk quiet lanes where all we hear is our sticks clicking against clean cobbled streets, windows shuttered against the coming day. strolling medieval towns whose stone sunrise colors rose, over rain-swollen rivers, Montes de Leon holding snow in hottest June. Each day's goal, a chosen place along the ancient path, carrying our packs on muscled shoulders, still growing stronger as we hike together. 4 weeks in, 400 miles at our back, with just a week to go, we glimpse a future déjà vu, knowing as soon as we arrive home, we'll want to go again, where we're most alive in the midst. And finally, one more, the return. I thought we'd fly off a cliff at Earth's end, but instead we took a train back to Madrid. I stood in the cafe car, gazed at rivers passing, construction of a highway, bulldozers, and broken earth. I stood for 3 hours, but my legs, grown strong from long walks over mountains, the Meseta, all of Spain, didn't tire. I was happy in the rumbling train, alone for the first time in a month. Still, it's hard to rise in the morning and not have a plan, a destination, a reason for being. The poet said, "Our steps are the path is made by walking." Wherever we are, it's all pilgrimage. This morning, in our own small town, I strolled slowly down the street, paused to smell the sweet scent of honeysuckle.
you.